Hi, I'm Quincas, and I'm a synth DIY guy. Welcome to your channel for modular synths, synth DIY, and new technologies in music and sound design. Today we're continuing my series on making microtonal music with modular synthesizers. And this time we're using a tool made for the task, the Microtune, or MuTune, or uTune by Tubbutec. Tubbutec calls it a multi-tool, and deservedly so, as it packs the functions of Quantizer, MIDI to CV, CV to MIDI, and MIDI router, among many other super useful features. Microtune is a perfect microtonal bridge between MIDI, USB MIDI, and CV, whether or not you want to use it microtonally. The main unit has 2 channels of CV gate I/O, but it can be easily expanded to up to 8 tracks by adding up to 3 of the new 2HP expander module. Each expander adds 2 tracks, and Tubbutec has sent me Microtune plus 1 expander so I can create up to 4 complete voices in my modular. This cool blue module sports a nice OLED display, a push-button encoder, an additional button, actual DIN MIDI I/O, and a pre-programmed SD card filled to the brim with nearly the entire Scala archive. You can also edit and create your own tunings and scales, calibrate it to your oscillators, and even continuously auto-tune your VCOs for unprecedented precision. So here it is, and I have my Linstrument connected to it. I actually think the Linstrument is just a better suited controller for microtonal music because it's not set up like a keyboard to play diatonically in a 12-tone per octave scale. I have it connected via MIDI right here. I've also connected Microtune to my computer via the USB here for when we go into a little bit of CV to MIDI. But for now, let's just look at it as a MIDI to CV converter. Just by adding expanders, Microtune recognizes how many voices it has available. So if I didn't have this expander right here, you'd see a screen with only 2 voices displayed. So when I press a key, the bottom left facing arrow of the corresponding voice goes bold, and the note number changes to the note number that you're actually playing. See, 53, 60, 43. As I add another note, channel 2 over there, the arrow also goes bold and you get that note number, and I can do that up to 4 voices. Now we see all 4 voices are activated, and we're playing a little chord here in 15 tone equal temperament Blackwood, which is a 10-note scale, and you see that right underneath here. Now, as I turn the encoder, it gives you these 4 different menus. So you have configuration, tune, info, and tool. Let me just show you really quick one cool tool that I like that's just generally useful for the whole modular, which is the MIDI monitor. So I can play a note here and you see what happened. And as the instrument is continuously sending pitch bend information, that's all showing up over there too. If I turn on the pressure here, you can also see that channel pressure information mixed in with pitch bend, plus the notes, note ons, note offs, all of that. So that's super useful. Now the little button over here is a back button. So I press it and I go back to the tools. You have a clock generator over here too. Basically it's on and off, and the BPM, which is really nice. It's internal and you can route it to anything you want. Here's the auto-tune and VCO calibration functions. These are more advanced. We'll take a look at these in a little bit. Let's go back one more level, and here on info, another display of what's going on here. So by just turning the encoder, you see channels 2 and 3. Let's go back again. Here's the tune menu, which is where you can select or edit your own tuning and your own mapping. And you can even export your tuning via system exclusive to a microtonally capable synthesizer, and it'll retune the synthesizer to the scale you create here. So let's first go into load here. And this is super fun because this module, since it's made for microtonal music, you don't have to go into the computer, find the tuning, create a tuning, load it in, etc. You have right in the module, in the pre-programmed SD card over here, thousands of different tunings, right? So the top position on any of these folders is back. So I can go back until the parent directory here, where you have 12 TET, which is the standard tuning, 12 notes per octave, right? So that you can use this just as a MIDI to CV converter without using any microtonal scales. Now, here where you see Higgins-Fokker, this is the gentleman that created the Scala program, which is the classic, best-known computer program for dealing with microtonal tunings, or Xenharmonic tunings in general. And this is what's known as the Scala archive, because it has thousands of scales. And here they're organized alphabetically. So, for example, if I want a just intonation, I can go to J, and there's a folder in here called JI. Press that, and here are a number of just intonation scales. So I clicked on any one over there. It's a 7-limit 12-tone scale. See, that's super nice because you see an actual description of the scale here. Sounds really nice. So it's a great tool for discovering new tunings right in here without having to go into your computer or whatnot. This is actually a really nice scale. Oh, by the way, let me just explain the patch real quick. It's very simple. I have 4 voices going here. The first 2 voices are my 2 Dust of Time modules, and voices 3 and 4 are the 2 oscillators of Piston Honda going through a Magella VVCA over here, controlled by 2 envelope generators from my Micro Ornament and Crime in peaked mode, and everything is going into this stereo mixer here through my Monsoon module for a little bit of reverb and delay, and to the output over here. So it's super simple, just to really demonstrate what the module can do. Now let's have a look at another page here, which is configuration. This is a very important page because this is where you set it up to do what you need it to do. So right now, if I go to channels, you can edit all the channels to make them all do the same thing, or you can choose your channels right here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's how many channels I've got because I only have one expander. And once you choose, for example, channel 1, then you can go into simple configuration, and this is where you determine what the CV gate ins and outs do. So right now I have CV out outputting pitch, and the gate out outputting the MIDI gate. So this is converting a MIDI note into a CV, and the MIDI note on and off translated into an analog gate, right? And then you also have the CV in and gate in, which we're not using right now. So as you can see, there's nothing plugged in to these inputs on the module for right now. We'll have a look at these functions a little bit later. So this is channel 1, and in fact all of my channels right now are set up the same way. So let's look at simple configuration. You can see pitch and MIDI gate on channel 2 as well, and trust me, 3 and 4 are the same. Now here on MIDI you have a number of controls as well, and that includes the pitch bend range. Toby from Tubbutec and I spent some time making this work well with an instrument such as the instrument that has continuous pitch bend, right? So if you just leave this at 12 and then adjust the instrument itself to the number of notes you have on the scale, you can approximate. I mean, it's not going to be perfectly mapped, but at least the octave will match if you use the same number here as the number of notes in the octave that you have. And that's assuming you're using an octaval scale. Some scales don't actually repeat at the octave. If I go from here to here, you see that's the octave right there. If it's an equal temperament scale or an equal division of the octave, then it will match. So you have system exclusive routing here. You have note routing page. You have this little matrix here, and you can determine what's going to where. Press this button here to get that arrow. So now if I send something from the computer, it will come out of my DIN MIDI output, so I can control a hardware synthesizer like my MKS50, for example. So it's really an amazingly useful tool In fact, one of the functions is when you get that little mu sign over there, it means it's actually going to be retuned. So that MIDI information coming from the computer will be retuned based on the scale you have selected, and then go out the MIDI DIN output over here. So this is actually not only useful in a modular setup, you could actually just use it for its MIDI functions if you don't have a modular. So right now I'm sending it MIDI DIN, and that's routed to both USB and CV, right? So we're not going to be using USB yet. We are using the CV outputs, so the routing is correct. Now, the clock routing is a similar page. It's for MIDI clock, so you can have MIDI clock from USB, from DIN, or a clock from CV input and route them that way. And same thing with system exclusive. But the page that you use the most in the MIDI configuration menu is output configuration here. So you can now assign your channels. So I have my channel 1 set for MIDI channel 1. Channel 2 is set for MIDI channel 2, channel 3 MIDI channel 3, and channel 4 MIDI channel 4. So I actually have a matching MIDI channels there. You can also set it to all and make a change that it will be reflected on all 4 channels. You can also transpose individual channels. Here on miscellaneous, you have an about page. You have an option for display sleep. I like my display to take a nice long time to sleep, so I give it 10 minutes. The number of channels, you can actually change it to just 2 if you don't want to use the expander. We'll leave mine at 4. And here on expert settings, you can do some DAC ADC calibration. There's calibration of the expander. All these things you don't really need to do because they come already done from the factory. Firmware update you might need. I've been testing some beta firmware that Toby's been sending me, so I've been using this function a lot, and it's so easy to update the firmware. You just load it up to the SD card and press firmware update and it'll do that. You don't need to really fiddle around with this menu too much. Let's go back. So in the MIDI input configuration, you have an option here called assign, right? And this is where you set the module's behavior when dealing with multiple notes. So if I have it in mono unison, for example, all 4 of the voices will trigger simultaneously as long as they're in the same MIDI channel. Or you can set them up with different MIDI channels so they can be independent voices triggered by independent sources. Now, there are a number of polyphonic types of behavior as well. So cycle will simply cycle through the voices. Even if I play the same note repeatedly, this is actually a really useful mode for tuning your oscillators, right? You can just press the key once, make sure that that's the note you want it to be, and press it again, do the same thing for your next voice, press it again, do the same thing for your next voice, and so on. With this mode, I can play chords. With cycle unique, it'll only go to the next voice when you play a new note. So if I play the same note over and over again, you won't change. But if I play another note, then you get another voice, right? And now if I stay there, it'll stay on that voice for as long as I'm playing the same note. Right? Next is stacking. Stacking, as the name implies, will simply stack voices on top of each other. So as long as you're playing one note at a time, it'll stay on a single voice. As I add a second note, that's another voice. Right? Now if I hold that down, then now we're getting to the third voice. So as you add polyphony, as you add more notes polyphonically, you start adding more voices in order, 1 to 4. So that's nice because you can set your first voice to be bassier sounding, for example, so that whenever you start building a chord, you will consistently always get that same voice as your bass voice. And then you can stack up the chord on top. So that can be super useful as well. And you have random, which, as the name implies, will just randomly cycle without any rhyme or reason between your voices, and that can be fun as well. So, this will go according to your preference, the kind of patch that you're creating. Okay, so let's create a new tuning. Okay, right now we're 12 tet again. If I click on edit here, you have the number of notes in the scale, the name, and you can create a new scale. So to create a new equal division of the octave, first I will choose how many notes I want. So let's create a 15 tet scale, right? 15 tone equal temperament. Click on that, change it over to new, press new right there. Okay, so now we should have 15 notes per octave. Let's check it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then the octave right here. So as you can see, normally the octave on the instrument are the highlighted pad here, but you don't get an octave in this scale. You get it over here, because this would be 12, 13, 14, 15. Let's hear what 15 TET or EDO sounds like. So creating a new EDO scale is as easy as that. I can name it now. And well, it actually names it automatically when you do it how I just did it. So that's fine. Let's just keep it like that. But I could give it a name if I wanted to, if it was a more complicated scale. So let's go back. And here, right to the left of the number of notes, I can then go down and edit the individual notes. So I can click on there, and then I can choose to change any of these numbers. And then over here, this is a ratio, so you can set your scale by the ratio. For example, 2-2 is unison, right? And it even tells you what the ratios represent, which is also super helpful if you're just learning, if you're studying microtones. This will automatically tell you that a 3-2 ratio is a perfect fifth, right? A 4-2 ratio is the octave. Actually, let's turn this back to 1 here. And here you have it. 1-to-1 ratio obviously is a unison. 2-to-1 is the octave. 3-to-1 is the tritave, etc. And now you can change 1-2. Here a 5-3 ratio is a major sixth, and so on. So that's note 2 there. Click on here again. I can move on to other ones. Our fifth note here is the 12 tet major third. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right, so 15 tet actually has some notes from 12 tet. As we move down, we see that the 10th is also the 12 tet minor sixth. Now, my oscillators seem to be fairly in tune. What happens if your oscillators aren't super stable or scale really nicely? You might even have that one oscillator that drifts crazy and you can never use it. There are two tools that you can use. Let's load up a scale here that we might like. Let's choose something from the Civish folder. If you don't know Civish, he's an extremely prolific electronic music composer that exclusively uses Xenharmonics and microtonal music. He has world scales here, for example. And we can choose something from like an Indian raga scale. Let's choose that. Sounds pretty diatonic to me. Maybe it's a JI diatonic kind of a thing. We could have a look at it. If we just go back to edit, we can see what the scale is. So we have a major whole tone, major third, diatonic tritone, perfect fifth, Pythagorean major sixth, classic major seventh, So yeah, it gives you names, descriptive names for the intervals, which is super informative and useful. So yeah, this sounds diatonic, but it's probably even more in tune than a 12th diatonic scale. Let's go back to a polyphonic setup. So we'll go back to configuration here, back to MIDI, input configuration, channel to edit is all. We'll change that to cycle mode. And now, yeah, this sounds super consonant, super euphonic. Very nice scale. Back to the issue of maybe you have some oscillators that aren't perfectly in tune. What I can do here, for example, let's say that my first dust of time on the left here needs to be calibrated. Here's a little parentheses in I/O. I can choose my aux outs, and you see oscillator 1 and oscillator 2. Since both oscillators are in tune by the master tuning of the module, any one of these will do for the calibration. So what I'll do is I'll send that oscillator output that's coming out of aux 1 here. We'll send that to gate 1. Why is it gate? Because we're not measuring CV, we're measuring frequency, right? So we use a logic input, not a continuous input. And let's go over here to tools, and we'll choose VCO calibration. So we're going to use channel 1, so that's already selected. You can save this calibration data for a particular VCO, name it. It's a 11-point calibration for the VCO, which is extremely accurate. And this can be used to improve the tracking of a VCO or to adjust the volt per octave scaling in case your VCO isn't super well scaled. First, you make sure that the VCO is plugged into the CV out, and it is. Now we will enter manual CV VCO calibration. Okay, so what you do is you start here on 0, right? And on the right here, it'll show you the difference between the expected frequency and the frequency you're actually getting, right? So 0 looks to be okay. We have no difference, 0 hertz. Now let's change to 2 here. And now Microtune is sending an octave higher, and it's telling us that we're about 0.16 hertz off. So let's edit that. We'll change this value until that difference is 0. And this is how you manually calibrate your VCO. There you go. 0. Yeah, it's kind of oscillating between 0 and 0.01 hertz. It's close enough. So now we go back to the note select here. We'll change it to 2. And we see that that's also slightly off. So set that to where we see a 0 there. There's a bit more drift on this note. Let's go to number 4 here. This one is a lot more. Turn that to get as close to 0 as you can. There you go. And so on. You do that to every note, to every octave. And then the limit for dust of time is actually 7 octaves. So I won't have to go beyond that. We can reset it, or we can save it, and we can name it Silver Dust of Time, for example. And we'll have that calibration in the memory here, and we can always load it up to any of the 4 channels that may be using this particular oscillator. Now, ideally, you would perform this with all 4 of your voices to have the most accurate tracking possible. Now, there's another really nifty feature here, which I've not seen in many modules, which is continuous auto-tuning, which means that the module will be continuously reading your oscillator and adjusting to make sure that the tuning is perfect. And that's even better. So let's have a look at how that is done. We'll go back to Tool here, and this time we'll choose Auto-Tune. And here you choose which channel. So let's do it to channel 1. I'm going to read straight from the manual here. While the VCO calibration measures the characteristics of a VCO once and then applies the voltages blindly, auto-tuning is measuring the VCO's frequency and adjusting it continuously as a so-called closed loop approach. In order to use auto-tuning successfully, the VCO and Microtune settings need to be adjusted. Your VCO's CV input needs to be connected to the Microtune CV out, which it is, and one of the VCO's waveform outputs needs to be connected to gate in, which it is. At the top, you can see the measured pitch of the VCO right here in relative mode. Here it shows that the frequency of the VCO differs from the expected frequency by 0 octaves and plus 26 point something cents. Next, you can set the channel. So yeah, channel 1, we've already chosen it. The speed parameter defines how quickly the algorithm should correct pitch differences. A setting close to 0 will adjust the pitch very slowly. This can be used to correct temperature drift of a VCO, but will keep the VCO's short time pitch characteristics. A setting close to 1, on the other hand, means the pitch difference is corrected very quickly. This will lead to a much more stable pitch, but might nullify some analog characteristics of the VCO. Let's put it halfway, 0.5, right? On started here, you can turn it on and off. So we'll turn it on, and now you can see the pitch drift, the pitch variance up on top is being corrected fairly quickly, and it's always close to 0. And there it is. And we can do the same for all 4 voices, and it will ensure that we are in tune. So that's using the module as a microtonal MIDI to CV converter. Why don't we have a look at some of the other uses? Okay, one of them is as a quantizer. So let's turn auto calibration off for now, because we're not going to be using this anymore. And now let's create something interesting without the instrument, without any MIDI. Okay, so what I can do is over here on Dust of Time, I can change the outputs of my auxiliaries here. One can be a chaos generator. I have 2 chaos generators here, so we'll choose one x-axis for aux 1 and one y-axis for number 2. Over here in configuration, we'll come to channels, simple config on channel 1, and we can have CV and pitch map. It's already selected, good. And then we can send it a gate, but we can also have it be continuous. So any change of CV will generate a new note. How do we do that? It's very simple. Gate auto trig. So we'll just go in here, and where it says gate in, you can change it to trigger, and we can set a delay time, which is it's set to 2 milliseconds. Let's hear what that sounds like. So we'll just plug a little cable from output auxiliary 1 here from Dust of Time. Plug it into that CV input over there. Let's come here to MIDI input just to make this simpler so we can use a single channel. We'll edit all the channels, make them mono unison, and we'll turn off everything but the first one. Okay, let's go to modulation here and make this much slower so we can really hear that scale. So as you can see, negative going voltages don't have any effect. Why don't we actually change this to a sample and hold? So now we're auto quantizing. Within the scale that we have selected. That can be super cool if you send sequencers or sample and holds, LFOs, you know. Why don't we send an LFO in there and see what happens? Well, let's change the here from sample and hold to a triangle. Now that's way too fast. Let's change the frequency to a much slower frequency. And we'll change the amplitude. This is a manual attenuator. It'd be easier than using digital stuff for this. I'm just going to put one of my little patch pal attenuators in line here with the CV input. There it goes. So yeah, you'd want to use a positive only LFO for this kind of thing. So you can offset, so use some kind of offset for that. Otherwise you have to be waiting a long time while it goes in the bottom portion. And there we go. Now this module is incredibly deep. There's so much more that can be done. For example, I could use a soft synthesizer on Bitwig or Ableton or Reaper or whatever your DAW is, generate crazy microtonal MIDI data, send it over there and control your soft synths that way. The way that it's doing this is it's adding pitch bend information to the note. So that allows you to trigger notes that are outside of the 12 TET system that is default with MIDI. You can also send system exclusive information to retune a particular microtonally capable synthesizer, such as Yamaha's SY77, for example, and there's a number of other synthesizers. Microtuning is actually part of the original MIDI protocol. Okay, so another thing I like to do with Microtune and the expander is to actually create an MPE patch. So what I've done here is I've removed the voices 3 and 4, the piston Honda, as you can see it's unpatched, and I've assigned some timbre changing parameters to the dust of time inputs A for both dust of times, right? And I've changed the configuration of Microtune so that the expander CV outputs are actually outputting channel pressure data. And the way that I've done that is, first, we now want the instrument to be sending one note per channel. Right? And since we only have 2 voices, we want just 2 channels. The notes are being alternated into MIDI channels 1 and 2. And this will allow me to have independent pitch bend and pressure control over each of my 2 voices. I've also turned on the loudness parameter here, and it's going out as channel pressure data. Okay. Now in here on Microtune, as you can see, I've now assigned channel 1 to MIDI channel 1 and channel 2 to MIDI channel 2, and I've turned off channels 3 and 4 as MIDI notes. Okay, that's important. Now, if I go back to channel configuration, you can see that channel 1 is still set up as pitch, right? Channel 2 also set up as a pitch output. Now channel 3, let's go to simple configuration, that's set channel pressure for channel 1. Okay, so when you select channel pressure, it gives you the option of where you want that to come from. So it can be channel 1, it can be none. So you can tie this to one of your other channels. I set this one pressure for channel 1, and then we go back and channel 4 now, which is the second channel of the expander. We'll have a look at simple config, and you can see it's channel pressure for channel 2. Now, as I play, the pressure I apply affects the timbre, and you can see that reflected here. When I add a note, you get that second dust of time there, and again, the pressure I apply is changing the timbre. Now I can pitch bend the channels independently, as well as apply pressure, because each note is occupying a different MIDI channel, and Microtune is then mapping notes and pressure data to one and the other according to which voice is being activated. So I can hold like a drone note here. One thing that's important is to make sure that you have set them to mono unison. You can be much more expressive this way. Now, you may have noticed that the pressure is a little bit steppy because, well, MIDI. You only have 127 values. You can use 2 slew limiters. I have the Rampage there I could have patched in, or Contour 1. But Toby is looking into implementing smoothing for these kinds of things into the firmware of the module. So hopefully he can pull that off. That would be wonderful. So here's a simple sort of generative patch I've set up. Microtones internal clock generator is triggering both channels. Dust of times auxiliary outputs are outputting X and Y from the first chaos generator added to this macro as an offset so that I can keep it positive. Now let's just choose a scale. Tune, load, and I don't know, let's choose a 31 note scale, maybe. Madagascar tempering. There you go. I have no idea what that'll sound like. And now if I go back to tool here, clock generator, I can click it to on. And there we go. And put it in auto trigger. Super nice. So now let's play around with some different chaos generators. Alright, that's cool for now. Hope you liked the video. Stay on the lookout for some music videos I might put out where I'm actually using this to make sweet, weird ass microtonal music. See you soon. Stay noisy.